Square Ball Podcast.
Well, hello to you. Welcome to the Monday edition of the show with Phil Hay. Dan here from the Square Ball. Brought to you by West Yorkshire Electrical. They sponsor the show. Fully accredited electrician who serve West Yorkshire, the whole of Yorkshire and beyond, doing renewable technologies and all the usual stuff as well. Solar panel installation, electrical vehicle charging, CCTV, security alarms for home and business, with finance available for your home and your business as well. wyelectrical.co.uk. For details, search West Yorkshire Electrical on your socials too. Phil, hey, hello to you, the Monday show. I've had a perfect weekend. I know yours might have been a little bit of light and shade because you were up in Scotland at Hampden watching Hearts lose to Rangers in the Scottish Cup semi-final. Was it League Cup or Scottish Cup?
It was League Cup. I'm totally resigned to never seeing Leeds or Hearts win the League Cup in my lifetime. And certainly not Hearts. It reminded me a little bit of, I think it was towards the end of the Christensen-Heckingbottom season with Leeds, and I was wandering through a train station somewhere and bumped into some Leeds fans who said to me, we love the away trips aside from the football, basically. And that's it. That's exactly how it was yesterday going up to Hampden. It was a lovely drive over the border. Scotland was looking beautiful. Football was shocking. However, we did have Friday night, which was at the opposite end of the scale. So not all bad.
Yeah, I've said many times that my happiness is almost pathetic in the levels that it's tied to the fortunes of Leeds United. And it's no coincidence that, I think I said in the run-up to this that the Friday night game had the capacity to make or break our entire weekend as Leeds fans. And honestly, I was skipping around all weekend in such a good mood. Like, do you know, I'm just going to go back and watch the highlights again. Let's watch a full rerun. It was great, wasn't it? What a performance. And where do you want to start with it then? Because it was a wonderful save at the end that has captured both the photographer's lenses and the headlines, wasn't it, to secure that win? That save by Meslier, a proper match-winning save.
Yeah, I've been trying to think a lot about the significance of the result and how significant it actually is. I had quite a few Leicester fans after the game who were saying, in response to various tweets of mine, which I think made it quite clear that in my view, I thought it was thoroughly deserved win for Leeds. I thought it was a really, really top performance and obviously a quality result on the basis of Leicester's form. But I think just as well, because that is a really, really difficult fixture anyway. And it was the structure of it was right. I was writing afterwards saying it was really multifaceted in the way it was put together and the way it worked. And you mentioned Meslier there, it was just those little interventions, massive individual performance from Kamara in the centre of midfield, very good pressing, loads of confidence in the play, which I think for the first time probably made Leicester think a little bit, knocked them out of their comfort zone, which they didn't seem to enjoy. But a few Leicester fans were saying to me afterwards, and it is a fair point, they were saying that the gap is still 11 points, and as it is with Ipswich at the moment, if Ipswich win their game in hand, I think that gap goes back to 10. So there's a big margin there, and I guess you can ask, in the grand scheme, whether or not that result on Friday night is going to be significant in the way the final table looks. But it felt it, and I think more than anything, and what I think Farke would have wanted from that game was the proof and the message to the players that they are as good as anybody in the division, and they can mix it with anybody in the division. They can beat anybody in the division. They have already turned over Ipswich at Portman Road, which I think was kind of equally big result. But that was just hugely impressive, I thought, from start to finish on Friday. And it wasn't a 3-0 win, it wasn't a 4-0 win. Somebody said to me afterwards, you're talking about this as if it was a complete rout. But I think what you did see was a side who were 14 points clear of Leeds before kickoff, and a long way clear at the top of the division. Already, I think, a long way on the road to automatic promotion, which I think they will probably get regardless of that result on Friday. I think you saw them made to be look second best, and to struggle to cope with Leeds. And it's the best performance so far under Farke. There's so much that was working for the team on Friday night, and the decisions he's making, I think, more often than not, are being completely justified. And I picked out Pirro as the one to watch before Friday. A few people said to me that they thought Pirro had a quiet game on Friday in comparison to others, and I think he probably did. But you cannot argue with the fact that it's working, and that the system of it, whatever Pirro's doing and whatever his isolated contribution is, as an 11, as a team, it's clicking. And the same, you mentioned Meslier there, the same goes for him. That was the decision from Farke at the start of the season, that Millie would go into the season as first choice. And there were reasons for that. There were circumstances that helped to dictate that. But you can't pretend that that hasn't been the right call. And that was a huge save at the end. I mean, really, really top draw save.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. Leicester are a quality side. You can see it, and it was proper two alphas matching up, wasn't it, on Friday night? That's how it kind of struck me. Two really good, strong sides, and I'm really pleased to see that the Leeds had the upper hand in that, and I think deserved the win on balance. And like you say, actually, when you frame it like that, I think you're correct, Phil, that it's probably more significant from a Leeds point of view as anything to do with Leicester. It does send a message internally, doesn't it, that, lads, you've got this, just keep your heads down, keep working, and your rewards will come. And whether it's enough or not, we'll see as the shakedown comes over the next sort of 30, 31 games, won't we? But in terms of what you could have delivered on Friday night, it doesn't really get much better, does it?
No, it doesn't. And I think it's probably quite helpful for them, actually, for Farke to be able to say, don't read too much into that result. Don't read too much significance into the fact that you've beaten Leicester, because I do feel like the Championship is starting to take shape now at the top. It's quite telling, I think, that Southampton have quietly moved into the position that they're in, because when Leeds went to St Mary's, there was a bit of pressure on them. And I was quite surprised, actually, at the way in which the wheels had kind of momentarily come off in that little period beforehand. But we said at the time, and I still think this stands up to scrutiny, that Southampton and Leicester, and in the end Leeds as well, all managed to get their ducks in a row through the summer. I think Leicester and Southampton were more organised than Leeds initially. I think that's really told in the form that Leicester have had to this point. They were kind of ahead of the curve in comparison to Leeds when it came to picking Maresca. Farke came a few weeks further down the line. Southampton had done a bit more business at an earlier stage, and I think we're in better shape for the season to start than Leeds. I don't think that's in dispute at all. But in effect, all three relegated clubs have set themselves up pretty nicely for this season, if not better than that. And I think that is starting to show now in the table. The fact that you've got Leicester in such a strong position, Leeds looking good, Southampton coming up on the rails. And as you said, 31 games to go. There isn't much point at this stage of assuming too much on the basis of individual results or a short spell of results. But it does tell Leeds that they're in firm contention for this. And I definitely think they are. And as I was writing my piece after Friday night, I was thinking more and more about, how much it actually matters to be in the position that Leicester are in, i.e., on kind of at the moment on course for the title. Does it matter in the Championship that you win the title? Is there actually a league anywhere else where finishing top is less important than just getting out of it? Like, the whole point of the Championship for so many clubs in it is to get away from it. Well, that's why you're in it, is to try and find an escape route. And
like Sheffield Wednesday, for example, are doing that.
One way or the other. And I suppose if you're in Wednesday's form, it doesn't really make any difference either, does it? You might as well go down into League One and have a bit of fun there, as opposed to dragging as few points as they're doing at the moment. But it was fitting, I felt, in 2020 that Leeds won the title, because they were the best of the best in the Championship. They were kind of untouchable in the way that they were playing, and it suited, the Bielsa era. It suited the way that season had gone. But there was nobody at Elland Road, including you or most of the support, who would have complained had it been 12 months earlier and had it been through the playoffs. And I don't think there's anybody who's going to complain this season if it ends up being the playoffs and it ends up working out. Although, the paranoia of that does kind of nibble away at the back of your mind constantly. But that for another day. If you're in this division, you have to find a route out, and you have to find a way of getting promoted. And that's why I came away from Leicester thinking, you don't need to fixate too much on the title. You don't need to fixate too much on the gap. What you need to know and what you need to see is that you're a team who have the capability to do it. And I think that was the message from Friday night.
I know football has a way of always biting you on the arse, and just when you think you've got comfortable, it can surprise you, much like it did with the game at Southampton, really. But I look at this Leeds side, and you're talking about, the message that this game sends on Friday to the squad, within the squad. And I see a squad and a team and a club it's almost unrecognisable compared to what we saw at the start of the season, sort of August, early September time, which was a little bit tentative, just feeling your way into the division, and slightly sketchy performances against like West Brom and Cardiff and things like that. And you look at the team now and the amount of confidence that just seems to be there, and you can see that it's clicking. It's almost like the proverbial oil tanker has kind of made its turn, and it's now getting a bit of steam up in the direction of travel that it wants to take.
But here's the thing. I mean, isn't that exactly what Farke said when he came in in the first week of July? I was looking back at his quotes and looking at how open he'd been about the idea or the possibility that it might not go great to begin with. It might not be perfect. It might not fall into place really quickly or as quickly as it has for Leicester. And I think he called that absolutely right. I mean, I've said this a few times, but right from the start, I've really liked a lot of what Farke has done with this team and the way he speaks and the way he handles certain difficult situations. I think are good. It's good for the club. It's good for the support. A good way of having faith in him. And I do think, as I say, that a lot of the decisions he's made have worked and have been correct. I mean, I can't help wondering with Millie. I did ask him afterwards, on the basis of that save on Friday, in the toss-up between Millie and Carl Darlow, why had it been Millie and how easy or otherwise had that decision been to take? And Farke said, on the basis of Millie's potential, and the potential he has to be a really, really outstanding goalkeeper, you kind of have to back him. I think the phrase he used was, if you've got a diamond like that, you've got to back him. That's how it has to be. But you have to remember as well that the Darlow signing was done on July the 29th, I think, which was a week at best before the season started. So there's no prospect really of Darlow playing in that first game against Cardiff because he hadn't trained enough within Farke's system. He hadn't been there for long enough. And you do find that your best coaches do not tend to just pitch players in, cold or without a bit of a warm up, a bit of work first to make sure that they're acclimatized and they're suited to what you're doing. So it totally made sense that Millie went in for those initial games. And I think, the circumstances have worked for Millie because he's then had the chance to rebuild confidence, which seemed completely shattered by the last couple of seasons at Leeds. And if you go back to last season with Millie, Leeds were in disarray. Leeds were a shambles. It was a kind of totally vacant defensive structure in front of him. But actually, look at the numbers. His own individual performance was not good either. He was letting more goals than he should have done. He was struggling. And I think, like a few players, he's benefited from the drop down. He's benefited from a change of coach and a change of tactical approach as well. But it's been the right call. And I think if his confidence does continue to rise and his performances continue to be good, then Leeds will benefit right the way through the season. A little bit from, similar to having somebody like Rutter up front, from having somebody like Millie at the back.
Something I noticed on Friday, it was something that I noticed on pitch, but it led my thoughts through to something off the pitch, and it led me back first of all to the away end, which was absolutely fantastic. I need to say, it sounded amazing watching it on the telly. Was it good in the stadium?
It was good, yeah. It always is at Leicester, actually, but no, it particularly was on Friday night.
And it certainly gets the fans more up for it when there's a perceived bigger clash like that feels more like a Premier League game, I guess. But I was going to ask, actually, with regards to the fans, have you noticed a bit of a shift in the attitude of the fans, that the anxiety that we saw in the early part of the season seems to have fallen away a little bit, and people are now starting to understand what Farke's football is like and the areas in which it really, really works and it's effective. And I'm thinking particularly things like slowing it down at the back a little bit sometimes and just having possession, just giving everybody a chance to reset. And also the pressing, it was the thing that I noticed up front, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier on in the show, Phil. When the attackers were pressing, they were pressing really, really well and quite aggressively in that early part of the game, but not always. There were certain triggers and there were certain moments when they went to do it. And it just feels like there's now more of an understanding, more of a harmony between the fans, seeing what the football's like and how it works and how it's effective. And it's also translating into things on the pitch too.
Well, the more it works, the more people have confidence in it. And you're right. The effect that the pressing had was it meant that Leicester had to go out wide, and they do have two outstanding wingers. Actually, I have to say, I think there are players in the Leicester squad who Farke would quite happily take. I think the players in the Leeds squad who Maresca would quite happily take. It's just two very, very good groups of players who should really go up this season. I kind of feel, but what it did was it strangled Dewsbury Hall to a degree, which is really important because he's been a big player for Leicester to this point of the season, and it also helped to see off Jamie Vardy within an hour. Vardy didn't have a single opportunity really to do that thing that Vardy's been doing for years, which is to hover on the shoulder, get in behind, burn everybody for pace and finish. That the opportunities just weren't there. And defensively, Leeds were just excellent right the way through. I know Byron was exposed in the first half, and there was that little point where you thought he's going to get a second yellow card here. And Leicester were almost playing for a second yellow card. They're deliberately attacking him, deliberately going after him. But, that in itself, I thought was a big decision after half time. And I think there are circumstances in which, or situations in which, a manager would get that wrong, where they would leave Byram on the pitch and he would get booked, and you would say, well, that was quite obviously going to happen, and it felt a little bit like walking into that. But Leeds were able to change it slightly in the second half and to adapt in a way that started to tie Leicester's wingers down, didn't give them the same amount of freedom. And actually, Byram had an excellent second half, and that I think there would have been as much risk, to be perfectly honest, throwing in Junior Firpo off the bench. Having not seen him play for a long time, and having seen him play previously, been fairly unconvinced by him in that role, as there was to leaving Byram on. And I think the more that a coach makes calls like that and gets it right, the more that you see a coach, for example, to go back to Pirro, to kind of defend his decision to play Pirro at 10, Rutter at 9 up front, and to see it work in terms of results over and over again, the more people do start to say, well, he evidently knows what he's doing, and he does have a track record, Farker, of winning the Championship twice. And on that basis, you should be saying, well, you would have confidence and faith in this guy. But football doesn't really work like that, does it? Because when it starts going wrong at one club, what you've done previously only kind of protects you for so long. And in the end, nobody at Leeds is interested in hearing, that Farker's won 2 titles at Norwich. He's here to get Leeds out of the division. But as you start to see it shape up, confidence does rise. And I think you've had a big switch from, last season and to an extent the season before, of the away crowd having that aura of, that air of to the bitter end with this, and being there because they kind of always will be, to actually starting to enjoy what they're seeing and to have good levels of faith in it, which they should at the moment.
I just had an idle thought then, as you were saying that. On that, isn't it nice just to be talking about the football? I was thinking, is there anything that's happened off field that we need to address? And I was like, no, there isn't. This is all that matters at the minute, is that they just continue this good run and the good football. It's nice. I'm having a nice time, and I think given what's happened over the last couple of seasons and the stuff that went before it, I'm far more aware of the need to enjoy the nice times as they arrive now. It's a theme that I've kind of touched on, I think, a little bit this season, is that it's just nice, isn't it? It's just good. It's nice to just be talking about a good football team and watching one.
Yeah, I spoke about this on the podcast that we did about Hearts and me growing up, and yesterday's a great example of that. Drive 4 hours to Hampden, get completely rinsed, and you do have to. You've got to find the joy and the fun in football wherever you can. And I think if you look too much at the bigger picture or obsess too much with the bigger picture, then it frustrates you, I think, more often than it satisfies you. I mean, I was chatting to Rob Tanner, who covers Leicester for us, on Friday, and we were speaking before the game just about how I think Leicester had certain advantages going into this season in the way that there was far more harmony in their boardroom. You didn't have the kind of outbreak of pressure and stress and friction that there was between Radrizzani and the 49ers as they were trying to get that takeover across the line. Maresca and early, deals done, able to pull in money for Barnes and Maddison as well in a way that will have helped FFP. But the ownership thing is significant, because if you speak to people around about the 49ers takeover, they speak about this buyout as being a kind of project that could run for 10, 15 years, something like that. And the concept of Leeds having no ownership discussion, no ownership debate or potential for ownership change over a period of 10 to 15 years is just totally alien to the club, because it's been the complete opposite. Going back to from Ridsdale onwards, there's just constantly been that thing in the background of, is somebody good going to buy this club? Is somebody with money going to buy this club? Is somebody going to take it on and do big things with it? And in the end, it's been this kind of incremental jump from one owner to another. And we might be free of that finally, which I think will make a difference. And as you say, that does help to reduce the kind of off-field goings-on, which is good for everybody, because it's not what you pay to go to the football for, is it?
It's not, no. It's a good point, that, actually. I mentioned a couple of shows ago, I think, about how I was ready to see Ellen Road be redeveloped now, and I think that's what it's a symptom of that. It's a symptom of the ownership. It's a reflection of the ownership. It's a sign that we've not really gone anywhere in any meaningful sense. There's been no progression over the last almost 20 years, particularly, stadium-wise. It's almost like they're just doing enough to keep the thing ticking over to get the safety certificate, but it needs so much more than that, and it feels like, or certainly the noises that are being made suggest that they're aware of that, and they will address that in due course, Phil. But I just want to return just actually to Sam Byram. I made a note there about Byram, and you say Farker's decision was a good one to keep him on. And you do find sometimes, don't you, in games that there can be a lot of focus and pressure on a player who's been booked like that, and they will try and target him and isolate him. But then the game will sort of ebb and flow and move away from that. And it was a wise decision just to sit on that one and see how it played out, particularly in the fact that he got his header onto the corner that led to the goal. And there won't be an easier goal probably all season than that. But I'm so delighted it was Ruta that got the tap in as well. And it wasn't clear from watching it as well who'd got it, because they were all going nuts.
Yeah, he's quite a threat actually from corners, is Byron. But I think it's a good point actually that about the timing of the decision during the interval. Farke might have said to himself, "Look, the game will change after half-time, and when it restarts, the flow of it won't be identical to how it was." And it makes you wonder if Byron had been booked, say, 5 minutes into the second half and then had the pressure on him that was there in the first half, whether or not a change would have had to come in that position. Whether Farke would have said, look, this is too much of a risk and this is going to go wrong. But I think you're right, the game did change and it did sway away from the wide areas where Leeds had been under pressure. It's good for Ruta to be scoring. I think I was making a point on the recent podcast that you don't want to be a number 9 who doesn't have a lot of goals in the bag. It never looks well. And however much your centre forwards have changed over the years, people still look for them to score. But I just feel with Ruta that his all-round contribution in an attacking sense is so good, and a level above that of everybody else. I've been massively impressed with Somerville this season, but I can't help feeling that Somerville's form is probably to some extent, a product of the way that Ruta is playing round about him, more than Ruta's form being a product of what Somerville is doing. I think Ruta is influencing an awful lot. And yes, you could probably get more from Pirro at 10. I think you always have to bear in mind that in the last couple of weeks of the window, they were looking at Amiri over at Bayer Leverkusen who would have fitted into that position. So that tells you that, in the 10 area, Farke probably wanted a little bit more in the way of options, and perhaps that's something they'll revisit. I don't mean Amiri necessarily, but that position they'll possibly revisit when January comes around. But you cannot pretend on the basis of results that whatever Pirro's doing, it isn't having some effect, because it definitely is.
Just with regards to Amiri, it is worth touching on that for a second, because his name's come back up in dispatches, hasn't it, over the last
I did see that.
few days? Because he's basically on the periphery over there in Germany, isn't he? He's not getting any minutes. And possibly a head full of regrets about the way that the potential move to Leeds over the summer unfolded. And I know from speaking to people at the club that his brother and the family members around him were very prominent in that deal, weren't they? Like they were part of the entourage that came with him. And the story over the weekend is he's become aware that he needs to shed himself of the family influence around him, whatever it was phrased as particularly, I can't quite remember, but the implication was, yeah, I need to get rid of him. He needs to stop hanging around with me and influencing where I'm going in my career, because it's not always working out for the best, is it? Any chance they'll revisit that, do you think?
It would be fascinating if they did, given the way that it ended, and given the way in which he was told to find his own private jet home after turning that move down. Although basically, I mean, just to revisit the story quickly, when he came over to see Farke and to see Thorpe Arch and Ellen Road at the start of that week, it was just before the League Cup game over at Salford. Leeds expected on the basis that he was coming over that deal was going to get moving, and then the goalposts kind of moved with respect to what was being asked for financially. There were demands made that Leeds were not expecting. So they just pulled the plug and they said to him, we're not going to do this deal. And by the way, the flight that we'd arranged for you home is no longer there. You can get your own. And that was why Amiri ended up in Briggate, with people taking photographs of him down there, because he was waiting for a travel home to be arranged via other means. He is a really good player. It would be, not unheard of, but it would be odd to go back to that after the way it all fell through. But there's no doubt that Farke really liked him, and no doubt at all that he would have taken him had that been done. It's funny as well, because you get players who have family members who look after them and do so very well, and really do look after their interests, and are almost better for them than external agents. But you do definitely have situations where you have family members who meddle in these things. And the one thing you can say about Amiri is that, and I think there was a stage in the summer where he thought he was going to Marseille. I think that's how it looked like it was going to roll out and how it was going to go. But it's not been a very astute decision, has it, to sit at Leverkusen, because it's not working out from there, and he needs to go. Yeah,
you almost get the sense that when Leeds pulled the plug on that and left him hanging just in the middle of Leeds City Centre and said, right, sort yourself out, that there was almost an intention to teach him a lesson there. So you cannot go around behaving like this, and you will probably find out over the next few months that you can't do that because you are looking a gift horse in the mouth here.
Yeah, acts like that, of that flight that you were going to get on no longer exists. It feels like the point of no return, really, doesn't it? It feels like bridges burned and as if there's no way back from that. Although you've seen many times in football the way in which situations which seem irredeemable actually aren't. And I mean, I don't doubt at all that he'd have been a huge asset in the Championship. I'm absolutely certain that he would have done. But like you, it was quite interesting reading that over the weekend because he's clearly realised that whatever was in his head in August and whatever he thought was going to happen in the final week, whether he believed that there'd be an offer from elsewhere and something else would work out for him, it didn't materialise, and he's kind of stuck. And the last thing you want is a reputation as somebody who's a bit of a pain in the neck and who clubs are best off leaving alone.
Yeah, absolutely. Can we return just briefly then before we close out the show to Glenn Kamara, because he did get man of the match. You singled him out for praise a little bit earlier on, and I think it'd be remiss of us not to talk about his performance on Friday before we finish the show. And Farke spoke, didn't he, in the post-match about how it just took him a little bit of time because he came to us late in the summer. He'd not really been featuring at Rangers to any great extent. Sorry for dropping the R word on you after the Scottish League Cup semi-final. I know that it'll be a sensitive time for you, Phil, but he was great on Friday, wasn't he? And a really impressive performance in, as we were saying in the run-up to it, certainly the hardest game of the season, if not the biggest.
Yeah, I think important to mention him as well because I and others have been banging the drum massively for Ampadu, since the start of the season. I still think that Ampadu has been the best signing to this point, although Byram is really running him close as a free transfer. It's big impact from Byram. But I think Ampadu has been the really consistent presence in midfield. He had a very good game on Friday, that has to be said. But Kamara was the player who stood out really strong and really good at disrupting and breaking up so much of what Leicester were trying to do. But not only that, it's not. I think that's the thing you're starting to realise with Kamara. That he's got both sides to his game. He can be disruptive, but he can also play. And I think he's got the vision when the ball's at his feet and when he wins it to look up and see what's in front of him and to set attacks moving. The fact that he hadn't been involved at Rangers was one of the reasons why it took so long to go through. I think Leeds were in two minds as to whether or not he would come down here and be lacking in fitness in a way that stopped him contributing really quickly to the season. But in actual fact, that hasn't looked like a problem at all. He looks physically incredibly fit. He's clearly a really, really good player. And again, just sort of feeds into the overall feeling that when it came to recruitment, Leeds got it pretty close to spot on over the summer.
Just circling back to where we started out, Phil, and the state of the table and the gap to the top two. It's down to 7 now for Ipswich, albeit they've got that game in hand against Rotherham, which you would expect them to win, all things being equal. So it's likely to be a 10-point gap. Where do you think this leaves Leeds, especially as we've still got to play Ipswich again at home? Ipswich and Leicester have to face each other twice in the shakedown. So we're sitting all right, aren't we, I think? Just comfortably sitting okay in the table and keep our head down, keep running our race and see where it takes us.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was picking through, on the way home from Hampden yesterday, I was picking through the games that Hearts have in December, which don't look very pretty at all, and kind of wondering what the consequences of those might be. Leeds, I think I'm right in saying, play 7 times between the 2nd of December and the 1st of January, those dates included. So that period is going to be very, very influential when it comes to how the table changes and who moves where, which clubs Leeds are able to reel in, or whether or not the gap will stretch. I think that's when you're going to have, at the end of that month and going into January, I think you'll have a far better idea of what's possible this season and what's looking likely. And it makes you wonder whether, coming around to that point, that will influence what they decide to do in the January window. I mean, I don't know about you, and I think the 49ers will try to be, and have tried to be, far more strategic with recruitment. And I think what I mean by that is that I think they will want to avoid being knee-jerk in January. I don't think they want to get to the start of the window and say, actually, we weren't going to do this, but shall we suddenly do this? I think they'll want to know at this point what is likely to be in the pipeline. I think transfers that they make, or any signings that they do, they'll want to be of use further down the line rather than purely for a 6-month hit, although that again will depend a little bit on injuries and other things. But I don't look through too many positions in the squad and think that actually there's much call to add players there. And I think they'll have to be careful of not signing players in positions where those players are unlikely to play. I think at 10, You can see the need for a little bit more in the way of resources. I still wonder about left back behind Byron, because it's very difficult to know what we're going to get from Firpo. And obviously on the right side of defence, with Spence still missing, that hasn't really settled down that position. But it certainly shouldn't be a January window where you feel as if you need to do a massive amount.
I'm going to do a really tenuous link now, so apologies for this in advance. But I was going to say, if you caught the Copa Libertadores final over the weekend, you would have seen that John Kennedy scored the winner in that, which was an absolutely banging goal, and he got himself sent off in the aftermath. Did you see that, by the way?
I didn't watch the game. I've seen the goal, but I didn't watch the game. It sounded great. I wish I had done. I did watch it that year that Boca played River Plate, just because it happened to be that fixture. But it's always a bit wild and wonderful, the Libertadores final. It's well worth a look.
Oh, it was absolutely nuts. And the reason I mentioned John Kennedy is because I was going to then really tenuously go full partridge and segue into saying, I think it was John F. Kennedy, his namesake, that said the time to mend the roof is when the sun is shining, i.e., go into this January window from a position of strength and then build on it. It's something I think Leeds have failed to do too much in the past, when we just needed those. I mean, you always want the extra bodies, don't you, in January? But if they are canny about what they do, they could set themselves up for a really strong finish to the season if they just add that little player or two players, and they've spoken about the loan market as well as being a particular area of focus. But I agree with you. If you look at where there's maybe just room in the squad for one or two more players, like you say, left back, number 10 perhaps, just to give themselves that extra bit of comfort, surely they've got to do it.
It's also about getting it right, though. I think it'd be wrong to say that Leeds have always sat on their hands in January. They went through a long period where the January window just seemed to be a complete non-event. But it's more, I think the bigger problem, or what handicapped them more or didn't strengthen them, was the inability to get those signings right. So even going back to 2020, when they lost Nketiah back to Arsenal, did Augustine, who made next to no impact and has actually cost them a huge amount of money in return for no return of any significance at all. That was a window where it didn't impact the final league position, but it didn't strengthen Bielsa's squad either. Certainly not in that position. And then going back to last January, they spent on McKennie, they spent on Ruta, they spent on Max Wöber. Wöber, I felt, was a decent enough defensive signing, but Ruta made no impact. McKennie was not a good signing, just didn't seem to suit the Premier League, didn't suit the style that Leeds were going for, did not find his place properly in that team at all. So it wasn't the kind of willingness to invest that was the issue. It was the impact of those investments themselves, which wasn't high enough. And January still remains the time where you can give yourself that extra percentage and that extra edge, which makes the difference. But I still go back to I think the kind of resounding point in football is that how your season goes depends on how well you recruit before it begins, or in the window before it starts. And that's why Leeds are looking strong, because so many of the deals that they've done have been pretty much bang on the money.
Well, it's 6 wins in 8 now, Phil. We're on that sort of a streak. Plymouth at the weekend and Rotherham to follow. Swansea after that. Games that Leeds should be going into as strong favourites and ideally winning and maybe stretching that out to 7, 8 and 9 wins. So, like you said, the run into Christmas is a really important one, none more so than the game just before Christmas, which is Ipswich at home on the 23rd. That could be a tasty one, couldn't it? But let's not look too far ahead right now, because we've got to stick to the here and now, stay in our lane, heads down, focused, and Plymouth at the weekend, as I mentioned. We'll preview that one towards the back end of the week, but it's starting to get a little bit exciting, isn't it?
It is. I think as well, good reason for caution is looking at Norwich's league position at the moment. They have completely bombed from the day of that game. I mean, they were struggling before Leeds went to Carrow Road, but I remember the kind of optimistic view down in Norwich being, on that day, Leeds were 5th, Norwich were 7th, 2 points between them. If Norwich had won, they'd have gone above Leeds. And now it's looking very, very dodgy for David Wagner. It's looking very dodgy for their entire season, really. And the Championship does have that kind of tendency to creep up on you in a negative sense. But as I say, with that many games in December, a lot of points on offer as well. I think Farke will be mindful of the fact that getting round to that point when it really, really gets intense over Christmas, you do need to be in a good position.
Yeah, just returning to something I said earlier, like I've come off the back of a great win on Friday, been buzzing all weekend, and now I can just sit here and look forward to, even anticipate, even wish for the arrival of the game against Plymouth at the weekend, and wish it was sooner. But I am prepared to sit and wait until the weekend. But be in a good mood all week, which you can't ask for much more of as a football fan, can you?
Well, it makes a change to last season when on these podcasts we just seem to be going round and round in circles about the same, the same failures or the same things that weren't working. But it's very hard to get out of that cycle of conversation when that's all you've got, and when it is about results and results are not going well, where else do you go with it? I think the thing about the games like Plymouth as well is that Leeds have been good at home this season. They have been strong. It was, it took a while to get going against Cardiff, but they've been looking better and better. And I think as well, we've seen often enough this season that they've started to work out teams who are trying to sit in and are trying hard to contain them. So they're set up nicely at the moment. And I do think that, I mentioned Farke's comments when he first came in. I think this is exactly how Leeds would have expected this season to go had it gone to plan, which is that, difficult to begin with, a few results that you're not particularly happy with, but reasons for that and mitigation for that. But when you've got the players, when you've got the squad, when you've got a bit of stability and a bit of calm, actually some consistency and some really good form. And that's what we're seeing.
Still unbeaten in the all-white as well. Still unbeaten in the all-white. And we faced 19th placed Plymouth Argyle at the weekend. What could possibly go wrong, Phil? Absolutely nothing. And we'll catch up again in the run-up to that and preview the game on the episode towards the back end of the week. Catch you in a bit.
Looking forward to it.
The Square Ball Podcast.